It's the holiday season, a time to put away the distractions of our daily lives and spend time with family and friends. You know, do the things life should be about. Cook together, feast together, play some games, curl up on the couch to watch a movie, and enjoy some of the gifts you might have received. Gifts like a new smartphone where you can play Candy Crush to your heart's content. Or a new tablet where you can upload a TikTok or check your Instagram so everyone can see what you're doing. In fact, if you're like most people, I bet a good part of your holidays were spent doing something just like this. Sitting in a room where everyone was enjoying their technology together. Well, not really together. Near one another, yes.
Sweet.
We all know staring at our phones or tablets isn't good for us. But I'm not going to scold you, because I do it too. So this year, I decided to try and do something about it. Testing, 1, 2, 3, can you hear me? I decided to try a tech Shabbat, one whole day in which I'd take a break from all my devices, to find some balance, and maybe, just maybe, a little spiritual renewal. So, my producers got me this old school little handheld tape recorder so that there is no screen. It will keep me honest. I can't check my email. I can't read the New York Times headlines. I can't even tell if it's recording. Hopefully it is. Anyway, off I go. But I'll be honest, it wasn't easy. Okay, strike one. Failed already. I am waiting for my train, and like I always do, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone to read the New York Times headlines. Because it's what I always do, reflexively. All right, but I'm not home yet. I'm still on the university's campus, so I'm going to count this as still being at work. So, okay. When I go home, no more phone. On this episode, we'll talk to Adam Alter, a professor of marketing at NYU and author of the book Irresistible: The Rise of Addictive Technology and the Business of Keeping Us Hooked.
The way that a lot of tech companies have very successfully kept us there is by removing the cues that have been around for generations, hundreds or even thousands of years, that prompted us to move on to the next thing.
And I'll get some expert advice from Sydney Mintz, who besides being a rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco, runs workshops in the Bay Area to help people understand the true meaning of tech Shabbat.
Shabbat should not just be for the Jews in any specific way. I think the idea of a Sabbath is something that every single human being can participate in and can feel as a gift to us as individuals, as families, as communities.
I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works. Adam Alter has a pretty vivid memory of the first time he realized that using his phone might be addictive.
I was on a plane playing a video game, and I had good intentions for the plane ride. It was between New York and LA, so I had a good 6 hours. I'd planned to do some work, to have a nap, to eat some food. And I was playing this little game on my iPhone, and I played for literally the entire 6 hours, and then we landed. It was like I'd been in a fugue state. And I remember landing, and the person next to me turned to me and said, "Are you okay?" Because I'd just been sitting there tapping my screen for 6 hours straight. That sort of pushed me to ask, first of all, whether that was just me. Was I the only one experiencing that with that game or with other games? And also, what other experiences did this apply to? I read an article in which Steve Jobs had basically said that he thought the rest of the world should have the iPhone and the iPad, but he wouldn't bring those devices into his home because he didn't want them around his kids. And so putting all of that together, this seemed like a really good topic for a couple of reasons. One, because it was psychologically interesting to me, the fact that we can lose hours of our lives to these devices. But also because there's a sort of broader sociological question, which is, why are there some people who know more about this than anyone else who are especially cautious about introducing these devices into their own homes? And so that drove me to research the topic.
And I assume it wasn't just Steve Jobs. Are there a lot of tech leaders you know who have a similar policy?
Yeah, there's this fascinating article that was published in the New York Times, and Jobs was the centerpiece of the article, but there were probably half a dozen other tech titans in the same position. So this was around the time when the rest of us, I don't think, were all that concerned about devices. That's obviously become a big part of the conversation now. But a decade ago, not that many people were speaking about it, but these tech titans were ahead of their time, saying things like, my kids get frustrated because they're the only kids in their class without devices, but I'm really hardline about it. And, there's this stark contrast between what they're doing publicly, which is to say selling tech devices and evangelizing tech. And then at home, they have this very different position on the same issue.
Do you think the tech titans who were evangelizing these, is it something that they realized kind of post hoc that it's a problem, or were they designing it from the ground up to be addictive?
It's funny. This was a question that I was asking probably 5 or 6 or 7 years ago and really struggling with, because to get behind the curtain at these companies is really difficult, especially if they know you're asking these questions. So I'd even scheduled meetings. I had a meeting scheduled with someone in LA from one of these large companies. I flew to LA and then I was ghosted. They didn't even show. So I had a really hard time getting behind the curtain. But then a lot of little bits and pieces of information started bubbling up about the early days at, say, Facebook, the early days at companies like Instagram that obviously then became folded under the same umbrella, the early days at Twitter. And what you see is that a lot of the people behind the early design decisions were very purposeful. They had a very strong sense of what they were trying to do. And they realized that the currency they were playing with was attention. So if you can't grab attention, and there are millions of other platforms out there vying for the same attention, you're going to fail. There's a lot of information that's come out now about the fact that all the early design decisions at the most successful companies were focusing most centrally on how do we grab attention, not just getting it in the door, but once we have your attention, how do we ensure that we don't let go of it?
If my first try at taking a 24-hour break from my phone is any indication, they figured out a way.
Okay, it's 9:17 p.m. It just failed again. I was sitting on the couch watching TV with my family, and I picked up my phone from the coffee table where I left it when I came home, because that's what I do. I have to admit, it's actually kind of sad that that's what I do, kind of reflexively, instead of using that time to talk to people around me, who I love, which is why I'm kind of telling you this hiding in my bedroom, because I'm actually kind of embarrassed that I messed it up. But anyway, I think I've blown my tech Shabbat for today, so I am going to try this again tomorrow. Okay.
So what exactly did tech companies figure out? How are devices designed to keep our attention?
Yeah, I think the way that a lot of tech companies have very successfully kept us there is by removing the cues that have been around for generations, hundreds or even thousands of years, that prompted us to move on to the next thing. So these are known as stopping cues. If you think about what it's like to read a book, chapters do this. You get to the end of a chapter, it's a gentle suggestion that perhaps you want to do something else. Maybe you want to keep reading, but also maybe you want to do something else. You get to the end of the whole paper or the whole book, you get that same question. Do I want to find another book, or do I want to move on with a different activity? TV shows were like that until fairly recently in our history. You'd get to the end of an episode of a show, the credits would roll, and instead of sitting there waiting for a week for the next episode to arrive, you would get on with your life. So these stopping cues were built into everything. They were very natural parts of everything that we did with our time of experiences. Tech companies have systematically eradicated those stopping cues, and so they've short-circuited this psychological drive to move on to the next thing. And that's everywhere. It's in the bottomlessness of the feeds we encounter on social media and news platforms. If you're on the web, there's no end to what you can find. It's in the way we consume video as well. If you think of a platform like Netflix, in 2012, Netflix introduced post-play. When you get to the end of an episode of a TV show, the next one automatically begins playing 15 seconds later. On the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of very old school psychology in here. There's a lot of basic reward delivery. You deliver variable rewards that are unpredictable, and like any animal, humans find that irresistible. It's hard to overlook. We find it very compelling, and so we keep returning, looking for the rewards. We post things on social media, hoping to get the right response. There are goals built into a lot of the platforms we use, having 1,000 followers, getting to the bottom of your email inbox, finishing video games, completing all the levels. There's a lot in there.
I found out exactly how hard it is to resist these rewards during my second attempt at Tech Shabbat.
It's 8:37, and I've got good news. I'm doing okay. My phone is giving me that Gmail ping, but nope, I'm not going to look at it, and I can wait. But I will admit, every time I hear that ping, part of me wants to go pick it up. I'll admit that I'm looking at it longingly, because I want to see what's on Twitter. But willpower is good. I am so far succeeding.
We were spending about 20 minutes on our phones a day until 2007 when Apple introduced the iPhone. And then the number went up pretty rapidly. And by 2015, so 8 years later, when I did some research, this was before phones were giving us a lot of feedback about how much time we were spending. But there were people who had developed apps, and so they were tracking this. And I spoke to one of these people. His name is Kevin Holesh, and he created an app called Moment. First, he said to me, guess. How long do you think? And I said, I think probably 90 minutes. And he said, yeah, that's a typical guess. But usually you'll find that people underestimate by half. And so he said the average is about 3 hours. And I found that surprising. I couldn't imagine how I could possibly spend 3 hours staring at my little screen each day. But then I started to track it as well. And I was actually over 3 hours. I was closer to 3.5 to 4 hours. I returned to him 2 years later. I was giving a talk and I wanted to update the data. And I said to him, has anything changed? And he said, yes, it's now 4+ hours a day, which across the lifespan, we're talking 15, 20, 25 years of our lives will be spent staring at these screens.
You know, in getting ready to talk to you, I was looking at my screen time metrics on my iPhone, and I think I'm averaging between 3 and 4 hours, which you're right. It doesn't seem like that because it's not all continuous. But then I remember that, you know, I'm 55 years old, so I don't sleep through the night anymore.
It's 2:45 a.m. and my phone is in my hand. Why am I up at 2:45? Well, I had to go to the bathroom. Yeah, one of the joys of aging. But before I did, what did I do when I got up? I reached for the phone. It's kind of a sad state of affairs. I never reflected on this before. It kind of seems just like a natural thing to see what the headlines are or who's tweeting about what. But I'm realizing just how automatic this is. It's coming before even basic biological needs. All right, but I'm not going to count this one. I'm putting it down to being in an altered, not fully awake state. Cut me some slack, people.
There's also data on how often we open or unlock the screen. It's not just about spending a chunk of 4 hours. It ends up being very fragmented, as you say. And so people will touch their phones 200 times a day. So it's a constant intrusion on everything we do.
So as our attention has been focused more and more on our devices, what has that done to our personal lives?
We just don't have as much of a personal life in a pure quantity sense. That's the first thing. So if you look at time use, there's a very small amount of space each day that's reserved for personal or discretionary time when you can do with that time what you like. Between sleeping for, say, 7 to 8 hours a day, working for 8 to 9 hours a day, survival activities like bathing, taking care of kids and older adults, all of that takes 3 hours. What's left is this very thin sliver of time. We now spend 80% of that time in front of a screen, which leaves this very, very tiny, less than an hour a day for face-to-face communication, for really engaging with other people. Also, exercise is supposed to fit in there. Spending time in natural environments is supposed to fit in there. So that's the first thing. It's just quantity-wise, we don't have as much time for that. Even when we're in restaurants, a lot of us are on our phones. You know, even in these moments that are supposed to be communal, that doesn't happen. I'm doing some research now to look at surveillance footage of, say, a playground in 2003 versus 2022. And playgrounds, you might have as many people as you used to have, and there might be a lot of kids and a lot of adults, but now all the adults are sitting on their own phones in their own isolated worlds. So the playground looks like a different place. It's a whole lot of people alone, but in the same space, whereas in 2003, there was much more cross-communication. So quantity-wise, we've gone down. I think also the quality of our engagement has degraded, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone. I will sit with my wife And the phone will come between us at some point during even a brief conversation. So even when we are spending time with other people, we know the phone is an intrusion. We know that it degrades the connection we build. It makes it harder to form bonds with strangers, and it makes it harder to delve deeply into conversation and connection with people we already know and love.
Okay, it's 11:12 a.m. the next day. Aside from that one little nighttime mishap, I've been doing okay. It is a little bit of a stressful day today. A bit too much to do in the time allotted, but so far, so good. We'll see how it goes.
Is it habit, or is it actually, are we getting rewards? And by that, I mean, even on a neuroscientific level, is it rewarding, even when I'm talking to someone, to divert my attention and look at my device?
It's such an interesting question. I had this question for someone who spent 15 years studying gamblers in Las Vegas, and she did this incredible anthropological study. Her name is Natasha Dow-Schul, and she's a professor at NYU. And she was explaining that, our theory of gambling is that it's just so deeply rewarding. Like, you can't wait for that next win. That jackpot just might be around the next corner, and so you just keep pulling the one-armed bandit, and you keep playing the games over and over and over again. And she said, actually, if you watch people, that's not at all what's going on. It is, as you said, habit, but also you get into this kind of stupor where you sit there and all your problems melt away. Any complexities in your life melt away. It's just you and this machine, and it's almost like you're drugged. You're tranquilized. And I think phones have that effect on us as well. I don't think it's that we turn to our phone for 1,000 rewards all the time. I think what often happens is they soothe us. They feel comfortable.
1:13 in the afternoon. Got back from lunch, started working, still feeling a little stressed. So what did I do? I forgot. I picked up my phone and I started just paging through stuff. I realized it's kind of like a pacifier in some ways. I can lose myself in it, and I procrastinate, but kind of also just distract myself from stuff I don't want to think about, because I'm not reading anything really interesting. But I've been reading for like 15 minutes until I even realized this was a problem. So, failure the second time. All right. I'll have to find another day to do this again.
I think in moments of anxiety or loneliness or boredom, we turn to our phones, including when you get in an elevator, right? We used to stand awkwardly in elevators for a few seconds while we pass between two floors of a building. No one gets into an elevator without opening a phone now, because it's just a way of soothing the whatever awkwardness or discomfort comes from that moment.
I'm struck by this image of us being alone together, all in our own bubbles. If we're not talking or connecting as much, how does that affect us?
On the larger scale, part of it is seen in the way we're polarizing and the way we're struggling to understand other people. It's not only driven by screens, that's for sure, but I think it's exacerbated by screens and the echo chambers we inhabit, where it's harder to imagine what it's like not to be you. And that's because we don't spend as much time with other people, and exposure is really important. There's a lot of very interesting research on the fact that humans underestimate how important it is to be around other people and how much joy they'll get from being around other people. The truth is, getting a phone call that you don't expect, bumping into a friend you don't expect to see, having a conversation with a stranger, when you ask people, do you want any of those things? They say, oh, I don't think so, not that much. But when they actually happen, they leave people feeling happier, more connected, better in 15 different respects on every imaginable well-being dimension. And so if you remove all of those incidental connections, because we're all staring at our phones, and you remove the deeper connections that come with friends and family, I think we're really sacrificing a source of well-being that we may not even recognize as that important to us.
In today's world, it is hard to take a break and find time to focus on the things in life that truly bring joy. But that's always been a challenge. Whether from a phone game, office responsibilities, or plowing the fields, we can get sucked into focusing too much on work, which is why a need for rest, a Sabbath, is a part of many religions. But perhaps nowhere is it as formalized as in Judaism's practice of Shabbat. So to get a better understanding of how Shabbat really works, which I'm going to need if I'm going to succeed in finding some rest from my phone, I called Rabbi Sydney Mintz.
Shabbat itself is whatever your work is specifically, that is what you are, I hate the word prohibited, but what you're supposed to stop doing. So the word Shabbat, the verb form lishbot, means to cease from. So there's a cessation from the specific work that you do. And why I like to point that out is because, let's say you are a writer. So on Shabbat, unless it gives you great pleasure, you don't write because it's how you make your livelihood. It's what you do every single day. But if you are a surgeon, you don't do surgery on Shabbat and you might write poetry. So that I like to think of it as there's a flexibility in the things that you choose to do.
From the outside, I think a lot of people who aren't Jewish typically think of the idea of a Sabbath as a day when you don't do anything. And to some people, that can sound kind of boring or even restrictive. But I know that's not the real purpose or goal of it. So when you celebrate a Shabbat, what is the real purpose? Is it rest? Is it spiritual growth? Is it finding connections or something else?
It's all of the above and something else as well. As a Reform rabbi, as a progressive rabbi, I do not observe or celebrate a quote-unquote traditional Shabbat in the same way somebody who is either Orthodox or more observant in that way, who would literally not light a fire, they wouldn't drive, they wouldn't turn lights on and off. That's a much more traditional way of celebrating the 25 hours or observing it. And in that way, I think people do think of it as being limited or restrictive, when in fact, I don't think it matters what denomination you are. If you're observing Shabbat, you are immersing yourself in nature and music and spirituality and prayer and song and amazing food and sex and rest and, the things that sometimes we push away because we're, quote unquote, far too busy for that. And in fact, if you celebrate whether it's a traditional Shabbat or you're celebrating it in your own way, it is really a spiritual and soulful replenishing day. I think Shabbat it should not just be for the Jews in any specific way. I think the idea of a Sabbath is something that every single human being can participate in and can feel is a gift to us as individuals, as families, as communities.
The idea that a Sabbath is something that can enrich everyone's life makes good sense. But how exactly did the notion of taking a rest from tech, a tech Shabbat, come about?
That was coined by a dear friend of mine and her husband, Tiffany Schlain and Ken Goldberg. Tiffany wrote a book called 24/6, The Power of Unplugging One Day a Week. And it's called Tech Shabbat because it's supposed to be just letting go of technology. And I think, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, that would have been a different disconnect. Today, it almost feels like somebody's pulling a lifeline on you when you turn off your technology. Like, how often do people have their phones really off for an hour, 2 hours, or 25 hours at a time? What has become much more important for us today is the result of having work at home. And I'm not talking about just the last 2.5 years of the pandemic, but when people got internet in their home, when they went from typewriters to computers to having, wireless, and you can work in the bathroom, in the kitchen, in your garage, in your car on the way home, that the 24/7 mode of being in work all the time disconnects us from ourselves, disconnects us from our spouses, from our kids, from our families, from the way that we want to communicate with one another and the way that we want to really enjoy our lives. So Shabbat is a way to say, okay, let's turn off that stuff that is distracting us, that's annoying us, that is work, and tune into our spiritual lives.
I think that's a really important part of it, which is it is a time for connection. And so whether you're doing it more traditionally or whether you're doing a modified or more modern version of it, the goal isn't on, I think, so much about what you're not supposed to do as the goal, but rather turning your attention to what you are, which are the things that I think, enrich us kind of spiritually and mentally and even physical well-being.
That is exactly it, Dave. Are you sure you haven't celebrated Shabbat yet? Because you sound like you
Well, I want to
completely get it.
I want to talk to you about this because I've been trying and I've been failing.
I think it's a little bit, in some ways people can understand it the way that people diet, right? So if you want to go on a diet and you want to start your first day and at lunch you have a donut, you go, it's over. I'm done. I failed at this. And then for dinner, you're having
That's right, because
pizza.
I was trying to do my tech Shabbat because I knew we were going to have this episode, and I thought, okay, I am going to try and do this. And just the diet analogy is wonderful because like many people who start dieting, I failed. I picked up my phone and I'm like, or then I got up in the middle of the night and I checked my phone because it's a habit. And I felt like that's it. I ruined it. I have to start all over from scratch. But you're suggesting that's probably not the best way to approach it.
Right. What I usually suggest to people, don't think of it as 25 hours the first time you do Shabbat. Think of it as a chunk of a day. So perhaps if you are interested in doing this ritual or creating a time when you're in Shabbat time, whether you're Jewish or not, you start out on Friday night and you say at a certain point, you or anybody else in your household turns off your technology, and it could be 4, 5, 6 o'clock, and you keep it off for the evening. And the next morning, Saturday morning, is technically still Shabbat, but you've accomplished 4 or 5 hours without technology. So it's a little bit like a technology diet where you just take breaks from technology and give a little bit more attention to your spiritual or your soulful self. So that's what I like to suggest to people, is that you do it a little bit at a time. And then if you do it for 4 or 6 weeks, all of a sudden you start thinking about the fact, I don't want to be on my phone. And it's not what's being taken away from you, it's what is added. It's an additive in a way to your life, because all of a sudden you have this time. And time is the one thing that is limited for every single human being.
Adam has very similar advice. He says he tells people who want to cut down on their phones to start with just 1 hour in the day, not 24. He suggests choosing a time that happens consistently, like dinner time or the first hour after you wake up in the morning. In his experience, the people who try this out end up enjoying it so much that they naturally start to extend the time they spend away from tech on their own. But when we're just getting started, even an hour can be tough to get through. But not to worry. There are some tools and strategies that can help.
Let's start with the most basic, which is it's grounded in a very old idea in psychology known as propinquity, this idea that the things that are closest to you in physical space will have the biggest effect on you. You know, if you ask people, would you allow me to implant a tech device in your brain? Most people say, I don't like that idea. But we functionally allow phones to be exactly that for us. 75% of us, according to data, can access or touch our phones without moving our feet 24 hours a day. That means that when you're sleeping, it's under your pillow or by your nightstand. During the day, it's in your pocket or on the desk next to you or wherever it might be. Mine's right next to me right now, so I'm failing the test at the moment. So the key is, based on this idea of propinquity, just try to carve out as much of the day where you cannot reach your phone physically without having to move your feet. It seems like a low bar, but it actually has a really big effect, because you won't use it as that adult pacifier. You won't go return to it as a source of support if it's not there. You'll do something else. Maybe you'll just be bored for a few minutes and allow your mind to wander, which is something that we've short-circuited now. That's an old analog solution to a digital problem, but I think it's the single most effective thing to do. And then create habits around that. And it's easier to do that when those periods of time are beneficial in other ways. It's not just that I'm spending the whole hour wondering what I'm going to do when I get my phone back, but I do something that I really like. I'm rewarding myself by doing the thing that I wish I could do more of.
Rabbi Mintz has some advice for how to do this, to figure out what we'd rather be doing, so we're ready to hit the ground running when we put our phone away.
Sit down at a quiet time and write down all the things that bring you great joy. Just write down a list. What are the things that bring you great joy? And another list. What are the things that really are hard for you or annoy you or that you wish you didn't have to do all the time? And look at those two lists and look at a period of time for the next Saturday. And again, if let's say you're somebody who works every Saturday, you say, my Shabbat's going to be on Wednesday or Sunday. I'm going to start by doing it for 3 hours on a Sunday. And you take those two lists, you say, what am I going to do that brings me great joy, where I'm not going to be nervous about being bored or not having anything to do for these 3 or 4 hours? And if you're doing it as a family, you look at the list, and if somebody, the thing they hate the most is laundry or dishes or whatever it is, you say, you're not doing that for 24 hours or these 6 hours. And if you get the list of what brings you joy, you pick a few things that bring everybody joy and do a few of those things together, and then find something just for yourself personally that brings you joy.
Another tool is to ritualize the process. Research shows that creating a special set of actions that have a symbolic meaning can help us avoid temptation in 2 ways. First, it marks a goal as a priority, meaning it grabs our attention and helps us feel committed to it. Second, if you do the ritual regularly, it soon becomes a habit, meaning both it and its intended goal gets easier and easier to do.
The habit part is doing it as a ritual on a daily basis where it repeats. And so it becomes just a part of how it is to live your life. That I know that every day around dinner time, there's a locked cookie jar that you can program it to lock itself for an hour. And I put my phone in there, and all the devices in the house go in there for an hour. No one can reach them. And then during that hour, we all communicate, and we feel like we have that time to get close.
Religions have used rituals in this way for millennia. They mark something as special, and if designed correctly, help nudge us toward our goal.
The idea of ritualizing time is very, very important in Judaism, because Judaism is actually a religion, a faith based on the sacredness of time, not on physical space, which means that you can practice Shabbat anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. It's the time that you dedicate to yourself and your spiritual practice. Several people have told me how important the opening and the closing of Shabbat, when they get to that point where they're actually doing the opening on Friday night when the sun sets, and they're doing the closing on Saturday night when there's 3 stars in the sky, that there's something about the opening and closing rituals that's very potent for people, because very often we lose track of time. So we don't even know when days begin and end. I was just asked on a questionnaire, when do you turn your technology off at night? And I was embarrassed because I don't have a time when I turn off technology at night. Sometimes it's 9, sometimes it's 11:30. And as you said, you wake up at 1 and you're back in tech time. But having a ritual at the beginning, like the Friday night candles and wine or grape juice and blessing the challah, and then ending this with this ritual of Havdalah, which is candles and wine and spices. It's this idea of kind of taking that Shabbat spirit into the rest of your week. I've had several people say how impactful it's been to have an opening and closing ritual where they have an awareness of how long one day actually is. And I think today, us modern people, we forget because we're immersed in a different kind of work time 24/7.
When it comes to preparing for Shabbat, Rabbi Mintz even has her own pre-ritual ritual, one that prepares her to experience Shabbat to the fullest by slowing things down after a hectic day and focusing her on the moment.
There is something about preparing and doing a ritual on Friday in the afternoon. For me personally, it's baking challah. So I always give myself a chunk of time where I set aside a few hours before Shabbat and I bake challah. As a bread baker, it actually takes time. And you have to slow things down, and it takes a lot of attention and focus. So bread doesn't work out well if you ignore it and you're on your phone and you leave. You have to actually focus on it.
Okay, let's hope the 3rd time is the charm. The one difference this time is I'm going to try and do what Rabbi Mintz said. That is, I'm making it a ritual. So I've got a little box here to put my phone in. I'm going to put it on my bureau, and as I'm closing the top, I said, work goes on, but not tonight. Work goes on, but not tonight. Work goes on, but not tonight. And I put the box next to the pics of my family, which is a reminder, right, of what I should be doing with this time, what the true pleasures of a Shabbat could be. So, let's see how it works. I am now going to focus on something fun, which is I'm going to cook dinner with my family, and then we're going to play a game. So, bye phone.
On Shabbat, if you can't pick up your phone and you can't text and you can't check Instagram and find out what everybody else is doing, you sort of get focused on, well, not what am I doing, but how am I doing? When was the last time I listened to my favorite Cat Stevens album? When was the last time I picked up my guitar that's hanging there? I actually see dust on the strings. When was the last time I did this hike with my husband or my wife or my kids? Have I paid enough attention to my dog? What I've noticed is people seem during their Shabbat practice over time to take their commitment to their self more seriously, whether it's about their eating habits or their health or their time in nature or their intimacy, that you start prioritizing yourself in healthier ways than you do at any other time, like on a Wednesday.
Okay, it's 9:37 a.m. the next day. And guess what? No phone. I mean, yes, there were moments I was tempted to pick it up, but I also saw the pictures of the people I love next to it, and I think even just doing that little ritual helped remind me that this was, in some sense, a special act. And so far, so good. And you know what? Today we plan to go out and do something fun. We're going to go out birding. Yes, birding. I'm one of those people with a life list. Don't judge me. Okay, talk to you later.
A lot of these things that we're talking about, whether it is food or sensual pleasures or music or being in nature, they're a way for us to reconnect with that sense of God or godliness or the divine presence in the world that we might lack during the more mundane other 6 days.
So, how'd I do?
Okay, it's 5:15, and I am back. And no phone use.
That's right. I made it. And it's not just because I left the phone in the box and went out. I actually took my phone with me just in case somebody needed to reach me in an emergency. But I didn't feel the need to look at it nearly as much. And to me, that was a kind of aha moment. Suddenly, I wasn't trying to use willpower to stop looking at my phone. My interest in it just faded away as I was more present with people. By beginning with a ritual and focusing on finding the true pleasures in life, I treated my tech Shabbat as a true Sabbath rather than a time of deprivation. And that made all the difference. Now, I'm not kidding myself. My phone addiction isn't done. But for the first time in a long time, I'm seeing its problems and a way to rise above them. I hope you will too. Next time on How God Works, we're sharing a special event recorded live in New York City about how religion can both divide us and bring us together.
The question about pluralism is actually a question right now that's striking to the hearts of the division within Christianity.
When conflict comes, you pick those Bible verses that are most aggressive, most warlike, and use those as a subsequent justification for hating the other side.
Join me in a panel of leading spiritual thinkers and scientists for a wide-ranging and sometimes moving discussion.
In the Sikh tradition, at the highest level of being, there actually is no enemy. It's not that there's love your neighbor and love your enemy. There's no distinction between anyone.
I think religion at its best is a constant reminder of this is not just all about you.
How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman of Future Projects. Associate producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Music and post-production mix and master by Merritt Jacob. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. If you want to learn more, you can head to my website, www.davedesteno.com.